Hey there, fellow wordsmiths. You know that feeling, right? When you're writing and you get to the end and just like blank page.
It can be so frustrating. You've poured all this energy into the piece, and then the conclusion just falls flat.
Yeah. We're talking about conclusions today, those last few sentences that can really make or break your writing. And luckily, you've provided us with some great source material on this.
Yeah, these sources are really interesting. I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of this deep dive.
I agree. Think of it as our quest to unlock the secrets of writing conclusions that actually make an impact, not just, summarize everything.
Right, because conclusions are so much more than just a summary. A really well-written conclusion can elevate your whole piece, leave the reader with something to think about.
So how do we do that? How do we make those endings really stand out and not just rehash the main points?
Well, our sources actually jump right into that. They emphasize that the main purpose of a conclusion should be to remind the reader of the main argument, but also offer a new perspective on it.
Okay, so not just repeating the intro, but actually adding something new. But how do we do that without being repetitive?
Yeah, that's the key. One of the sources actually gives this example thesis. The best time to visit New York City is springtime. And they say, instead of just saying that again in the conclusion, use what we've learned throughout the piece to reframe it.
So kind of connect it back to the reader's emotions or their experiences.
Exactly. We could say something like, springtime in New York City is more than just pleasant weather. It's a chance to witness the city's vibrant energy reawaken, offering an experience unlike any other season.
Oh, that's nice. Makes me want to book a flight right now. So we've got this fresh perspective on our thesis. What's next?
Well, then we need to weave in the main points that we've made throughout the piece. But it's not just summarizing them, like a list. We need to actually show how they connect and support our argument.
One of the sources uses a great analogy. They say it's like weaving a tapestry.
Yes, I love that analogy. Each point is like a thread, and we're carefully interweaving them to create this final picture.
Right.
So, for example, if we were writing about visiting New York City in the spring, our main points might be, it's affordable, it's comfortable, and there's tons to do.
So how would we combine those threads into a conclusion that feels cohesive, like it all comes together?
We could say something like, with its mild temperatures, countless attractions, and surprisingly manageable costs, springtime allows you to fully immerse yourself in the magic of New York City without breaking the bank. So you see how that combines those separate ideas into one compelling statement.
Yeah, that's really good. It's not just summarizing, it's showing the reader how those elements work together.
Exactly. And as we start to move towards those final sentences, we can use another powerful technique that one of the sources calls coming full circle.
Coming full circle. I like that. Tell me more.
It's all about creating a sense of completion for the reader, like they've been on this satisfying journey with us. And we can do that by kind of subtly echoing things from the introduction and the conclusion, even just revisiting a key phrase or concept.
Okay, so it's like we're tying a ribbon around the whole piece, bringing it all back to where we started.
Precisely. It lets the reader know, okay, we explored this idea, and now we're back where we began, but hopefully with a deeper understanding.
I like that. And actually, one of the sources uses the example of starting with a quote and then finding a way to connect back to it in the conclusion. They use this quote from Georgia O'Keeffe: "One can't paint New York as it is, but rather as it is felt." How can we use that to create that full circle feeling?
Well, if our piece is about experiencing New York in the springtime, we could weave that idea of feeling the city into our conclusion. We could say something like, as you plan your trip, remember, it's not just about seeing the landmarks, it's about feeling the city's unique energy. And springtime, with its vibrant reawakening, offers a chance to experience that energy in its fullest form.
Ooh, that's really good. It brings us back to that idea of experiencing the city, just like the O'Keeffe quote. I'm seeing how these techniques can add so much depth to our writing.
And they can be applied to any topic, not just travel writing. Whether it's a persuasive essay or a personal reflection, these techniques can elevate your conclusions from summary to a really memorable ending.
This is making so much sense. But before we move on to some of the other techniques the sources suggest, let's take a moment to just absorb all this.
Yeah, good idea. I think our listeners will appreciate that. It's amazing, right, how much psychology actually goes into writing.
Oh, absolutely. I'm always fascinated by how our brains work, especially when it comes to storytelling.
One of the sources talks about this. It's called the serial position effect. Basically, it means that we tend to remember the beginnings and endings of things more vividly than the little
Oh,
parts.
yeah, like when you go on vacation, you remember arriving at your destination, all that excitement, and then that bittersweet feeling of leaving. But the stuff in between, it all kind of blends together.
Exactly. And when you apply that to writing, well, it means that the conclusion is our last chance to make a lasting impression on the reader.
So it's not just about summarizing the information, but also leaving them with a feeling, an emotion, maybe even a question.
Exactly. One of the sources actually suggests that instead of tying everything up neatly, we should aim to leave the reader with a sense of incompleteness.
Incompleteness, really. Isn't the point of a conclusion to wrap everything up?
Well, not always.
Yeah.
Think about those movies that end on a cliffhanger, or a book that leaves you with unanswered questions. They stay with you, right? You keep thinking about them.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's like planting a seed in the reader's mind that continues to grow even after they've finished reading.
Exactly. And that's what we want, to spark curiosity, make them think, really leave them with a sense of wonder.
I love that. It makes me realize that a conclusion doesn't have to be the definitive end. It can be more like an invitation to continue the conversation.
Exactly. Okay, so another strategy the sources highlight is something they call ending on a high note.
Ooh, I like the sound of that. Ending on a high note. But what does that really mean? Is it just ending with a positive statement?
Well, it can be, but it's more nuanced than that. I think it's more about leaving the reader with a sense of hope, possibility, or even a call to action, like those speeches that end with a message that inspires you to make a difference.
One of the sources suggests asking ourselves a few questions when we get to the conclusion. Like, is there more research to be done on this topic? Or is there hope for the future based on what we've learned?
Those are great questions. By ending on a note that inspires, motivates, or encourages further engagement, we leave the reader feeling empowered, not deflated or indifferent.
That's so important. We want to leave them feeling good. So we've covered rephrasing the thesis, weaving together the main points, coming full circle, creating a sense of incompleteness, and ending on a high note. What else do our sources recommend?
Well, they talk about using useful phrases, but they also warn against relying on them too much.
You mean like in conclusion or to sum up?
Yeah, exactly. And while those phrases can be helpful in some cases, they can sound really formulaic and predictable if you overuse them.
One of the sources makes a great comparison. They say it's like using too much salt in a dish. A little bit can enhance the flavor, but too much can just ruin the whole thing.
That's such a good analogy. The key is to use those phrases strategically,
Mm.
always prioritizing clarity and flow over sticking to some rigid formula.
So, what are some alternatives? How can we signal that we're wrapping up without resorting to those cliches?
Well, instead of in conclusion, you could say something like, as we've seen, or the evidence suggests. And instead of to sum up, you could use ultimately or in essence.
I like those. Much more natural and engaging.
Right. The goal is to make the conclusion feel like an organic part of the piece, not just something you tacked on at the end.
This is all making so much sense. It's about finding that balance between clarity, creativity, and being authentic.
Absolutely. And speaking of clarity, one of the sources actually provides a final impression checklist. It's a great tool to make sure we're hitting all the key points.
Oh, I love checklists. What kind of things does this one include?
Well, some of the questions are, did you rephrase your thesis in a fresh way? Did you avoid using cliches? Did you successfully connect all your main points? And did you create a sense of completion or leave the reader with something to think about?
Wow, that's a fantastic checklist. It's like having a built-in editor to help us polish our conclusions and make them as effective as possible.
I know, right? It encourages us to take a step back, look at our work with a fresh perspective, and make sure those conclusions are as strong as they can be.
This is all so helpful. I'm already feeling more confident about approaching conclusions, not just like throwing something together at the last minute.
And like anything with writing, crafting strong conclusions takes practice. The more you experiment with these techniques, the more comfortable and skilled you'll become.
I'm excited to put these tips into action. But before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier. That idea of leaving the reader with a sense of incompleteness. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, of course. I think it's a really fascinating concept. Essentially, what it means is, it means we kind of resist that urge to tie everything up too neatly. Instead of giving all the answers, we can leave the reader with a question, or maybe a thought-provoking scenario, or even a hint that there's more to explore beyond what we've covered in the piece.
Oh, I see. So we're inviting the reader to continue the conversation in their own minds.
Exactly. Think about some of the most memorable books or movies you've experienced. Often the ones that stay with you the longest are the ones that leave you with a sense of wonder, a desire to know more, maybe even a little bit of ambiguity.
One of the sources brings up this really interesting point about using a conclusion to kind of hint at possibilities for the future or unanswered questions related to the topic. They say it can really spark the reader's imagination and leave a lasting impression.
Yeah, I agree. Instead of just restating our main points, we can use the conclusion to open up new avenues of thought, suggest different perspectives, or even challenge some of the assumptions we've made along the way.
I love that. It turns the conclusion from like a passive summary into something much more active. It's like a catalyst for further exploration.
Exactly. And it really shows respect for the reader's intelligence. We're inviting them to be a part of the conversation, not just passively absorb information.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I feel like I finally understand how to approach conclusions with more purpose and even a little bit of artistry.
And remember, the most important thing is to let your own voice and perspective shine through. These techniques are just tools to help you express your ideas in a way that connects with your readers.
Absolutely. Well, I think our listeners are feeling just as inspired as I am to go back and look at their own writing with fresh eyes.
I hope so. The next time you sit down to write and you're staring at that blinking cursor trying to figure out how to end your piece, remember, the conclusion isn't just an ending, it's an opportunity. It's a chance to leave your mark on the reader, spark their imagination, and make your words truly memorable.
So well said. And on that note, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. As you're crafting your next conclusion, ask yourself, what makes you want to share a piece of writing with someone else? What kind of ending would make you feel compelled to pass it along, to start a conversation, to leave a lasting impact? Keep that question in mind as you work on those final sentences, and I guarantee you'll create conclusions that truly resonate. Until next time, happy writing.